So this is lesson 5. This is lesson 5, the incarnation of Christ, and we're going to talk a little bit about what that word means. But first, we're going to read about the incarnation of Christ, which is stated in it's stated in a number of places, but John states it this way in John 1. And the Word became flesh. The Word is Jesus, right? So, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about Him and cried out, "This is He of whom I said, He who comes after me ranks before me, because He was before me. For from His fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made Him known." Okay, so I want to go through a couple parts here because there's a lot of pronouns going on, and you can get lost in those pronouns. So the first one I want to talk about is, for from His fullness we have all received grace upon grace. So the Him is Jesus. So from the fullness, from the fullness of Jesus, we have received grace upon grace. And then verse 18 says, "No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made Him known." What that's saying is nobody has seen God the Father. And then it says, the only God, that's Jesus, who is at the Father's side. And then Jesus, has made God known. So it could be said this way. No one has ever seen God the Father. The only God, Jesus, who is at the Father's side, Jesus has made God the Father known to us. And it's just a beautiful passage about Christ coming to earth, first as a baby, and then as a man to die for our sins. We're using this word incarnation, and it's kind of an old-fashioned word. It's not a word that we use very often. But you can hear like parts of it in other words. So have you ever heard the term carnivore? What is a carnivore? A meat eater. Have you ever eaten carnitas?
Yes.
What do you know? Do you know what that? Yeah. Let's go now. What does that mean? What does carnitas mean?
Is it pork?
It just means meat, really. It can be pork. Usually, what?
Spanish.
I can't understand what you're saying.
Spanish.
Spanish, yeah. Carnitas. Yeah. So tell me what it means. Meat. Yeah, there you go. That's the only Spanish I know, right there. But that's all I need to know because I go to Chipotle and I say, "Give me carnitas." So listen. The incarnation, you see that term incarnate. Ladies. I said we're not going to do this for very long. Okay. Eyes and ears up here. Incarnate. Christ is incarnate. He was made flesh. And so the incarnation of Christ is God the Son coming from heaven to be born as a human baby. And He was both fully human and fully divine. The only human that ever was both things. And John tells us that the Word became flesh, which means He became something He had never been before. To become means to have something happen for the first time. And He was made flesh. He became flesh and became a man for the first time. So God, who is spirit, had never been in human flesh before this. But now when Jesus was on earth, he was God in the flesh walking around on earth. And the Word became flesh. And this is the Christmas story, right? That Jesus was born in Bethlehem as a baby. And when that happened, he was God in the flesh, incarnated, incarnate. Now, had Jesus appeared before he was born as a baby? Had he appeared in human form before he was born? He didn't appear in human form, but did he appear in someone? Okay, give me some examples. The burning bush, right, was a visible representation. What else? Yes. There was another in the furnace, right? Yeah. Yeah. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they looked and there was a fourth person. That was Jesus. What else? What? A visible appearance of Jesus. Not a physical appearance, but a visible one in the Old Testament. There's some people that believe that the angel that Jacob was wrestling with was actually the pre-incarnate Christ. And there are other places. Now listen, that is not Jesus appearing in the flesh. That is called a theophany. This means God, theo, and this means appearance. So a theophany is the appearance of God, but it is not in the flesh. It is a visible appearance, but not a fleshly appearance, like the burning bush. It was visible, and it was God, but it wasn't a human form, wasn't in human form. And that was true in the Old Testament, that God, Jesus, had appeared to people, but not in a body, not in a flesh and bones body. It was visible, but not in a body. So in Bethlehem, when Christ actually became human, then the incarnation occurred. Now, when we say that that God dwelled in man, it isn't just that God dwelt in Jesus. It's more than that. I mean, we could say that, right? God lives in us. It's more than that. He became flesh. He became a man. He was the only person to ever live to be fully God and fully man. And that's the term that is used for that, and it's unique in the literal sense. There's no one else like him. So God became man, and he became what he had not been before. He took on flesh in order to come and live and die for us, and then rise from the grave. But in doing so, in becoming a man, Jesus never ceased to be what he always had been. He had always been God. He had always been literally, right? In the beginning was the Word. He is eternal. So he took on flesh for the first time, but he never ceased to be God. I had a friend in college, and his name is JB. It is. And he was a singer, he was a songwriter, he had a band, and I was his manager. I probably shouldn't say this. I really only became his manager because I had a crush on him around southern Minnesota with Emily's. He wrote a song called God Man about Jesus. And that's what I think of when I think of this, that he was the God Man. And he was fully God and fully man. So I probably have missed some of these. So he was in fleshly form. The Word became flesh. He was not a theophany. He was not a visible but not literal appearance. He was literally a man. And then he dwelt among us. I told you that word tabernacle means to pitch your tent somewhere. So my daughter's getting married on November 10th. And Mrs. Peltier is going to take care of our dog Mabel for a couple of days over the weekend while we have family coming into town and all of that. And so she was talking to me and she said, okay, but that's a long weekend, so we're probably going camping. And I was a little concerned about that because Mabel, when she's on leash, she doesn't like other dogs. When she's off leash, she loves other dogs, but she thinks she's protecting whoever's holding the leash. And I had this picture of, dogs coming up to her and she's on a leash and they're going to get upset. And she explained to me, no. So you've got your space right here and then the next hamper's here and nobody goes into anybody else's space. So she'll be fine. We've got a stake that goes into the ground. But that idea of a campground where you're pitching your tent or parking your RV right next to someone else, that's what this is saying. That he dwelt among us. He lived among us. He wasn't aloof. He wasn't apart from everyone else. He pitched his tent right next to ours. And that's what the term tabernacle means, to pitch a tent. So Christ in his fleshly form was living right alongside everyone else. And he was constantly on the move, just like the tabernacle of the Jews. Tell me what you know about the tabernacle. What do you know about the tabernacle? It was a sacred place. What else? It's where the Ark of the Covenant was. Yeah. When was it in use? A long time ago. A very long, even longer than I've been alive. Yeah.
After the veil ripped, right? It was before that.
That was the temple.
Or was it still used?
That was the temple, not the tabernacle. Yeah. So when was it in use? Who used it? Okay. Apparently I need to put on my history teacher hat. What did you say?
Wait, we're talking about tabernacle?
No, we're not talking. Yeah, we're talking about the tabernacle, not the temple.
Okay.
So it was their movable place of worship when they were wandering in the desert. Right? They leave Egypt. They go to Mount Sinai, and God gives them instructions to build this tabernacle. Specific instructions. Now, it is the forerunner, and it is kind of the template for the eventual temple, which was much bigger. But the tabernacle had to be movable because they were on the move constantly, and so they when they got to the new place, then they would set up camp. They would set up the tabernacle, and they put their own tents around that tabernacle. And so the tabernacle was in use during the time when the Jews were going from Egypt to the Promised Land. And just like God, God pitched his tent right in the middle of the Israelites, Jesus came and he pitched his tent right in the middle of the Jews, and he was living among them. He wasn't aloof. He wasn't apart from them. But it was temporary. It was a temporary living quarters. And who knows what happened to it? We don't know. But once they were in the Promised Land, they didn't need that anymore. They eventually built the temple, which was much bigger, but based off the tabernacle. And so we're going to show some comparisons between Christ and the tabernacle. Just as it was temporary. So here's and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen His glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. So he became flesh and dwelt among us, and where it says dwelt among us, that's where it literally means he pitched his tent right next to us. He pitched his tent right among the people. So it was, there we go. It was temporary. Now, I don't know if this is exactly what it looked like. This is the, this is where the altar was, and the altar was where they did the sacrifices. And it looked something like this. I don't know. But when they set up the tabernacle, each tribe, each of the 12 tribes, had their own place around it, and they would camp all around the tabernacle. The tabernacle was the center of their camp. And it was temporary. It was never meant to be used forever. It was never meant to last forever. It's a tent, for heaven's sake. It was, it was constantly on the move. And Jesus was as well. Jesus didn't stay anywhere for very long. And he was only here for 33 years. Now, this next one I take a little bit of exception with. I'll explain. So, outwardly unattractive. I don't know if the tabernacle was unattractive or not. I mean, I don't think tents are very beautiful to look at, but this is trying to say that Jesus was ugly. And that's not what the verse means that they're using. So I'm going to read the verse to you, and then I'm going to explain to you what that means. I don't know what Jesus looked like. I just don't think this means that Jesus was ugly. So, for he grew up, so this is a prophecy of Messiah. So, one of many. So, the he is Jesus. For Jesus grew up before him, before God, like a young plant and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. This is what it's saying, that he looked like an ordinary Jew. He looked like a normal Jewish man. Like his face wasn't glowing, he didn't have, a six-pack of abs, or he was just normal. He's just a normal guy. For looks. And it wasn't something, so this tent, I don't know if it's ugly, but it sure ain't the Mormon tabernacle, right? I mean, it's I don't know if you've ever seen a Mormon tabernacle, but they're massive and they're impressive and they're white and they're huge. This is just a tent. There's nothing ugly about it, but there's nothing to write home about, right? It's just a normal tent. Just look like any other Jew, Lillian.
Yeah, but
China.
like, we not ever get married.
No.
And they were all supposed to get married at like 13.
Yeah, but that wasn't what he was there to do.
I know, but like,
The great
anyone
race of
was
family.
like, anyone like, when he was like, I think he wasn't, like, he was out because, I think he ever like, to be attention to that.
No, he said to his own parents when he stayed at the temple and they left and they found him and he said, "Didn't you know I have to be about my Father's business?" He came for one reason and one reason only, to save humanity, and that's what he did. And he didn't look to the right or the left or go on a date or anything like that. He was there to do his Father's will. And so that's he wasn't married. He had friends, at least 12 of them. One of them wasn't married. So the tabernacle was temporary, and then normal, and then it was also the place where God dwelt on earth. The tabernacle was God's dwelling place. So at the back of the tabernacle and also of the temple was the Holy of Holies. So you had the holy place in the temple, and then you also had the most holy place, and it's called the Holy of Holies, and that is where, and this is the Ark of the Covenant, and where the angels are, that was the dwelling place of God. When they set up the tabernacle, and when they put the Ark of the Covenant in the tabernacle, God flashed some of his glory, and it freaked the people out. You can read this in Exodus, and they're going, shut up, we can't handle this. Because God showed some of his glory to them. And so God went with them because the ark went with them. God went with them. And when the tabernacle was in place, then that was the place, and the Ark of the Covenant was there. That was the place where God dwelled on earth. And then they moved into the Promised Land, and they built the temple, and the Ark went into the temple. And that was the place where God dwelt on earth. What happened after Jesus died? Yeah.
The one I said before?
What?
The one I said before? Of the thing ready?
Yes. The veil of the temple, the curtain in front of the holies of holies, torn in two, and that's because we no longer need the ark. And I don't know what happened to the ark; it got stolen or destroyed or something. But it doesn't matter because now we can have, because of Jesus' death and resurrection, we can have a personal relationship with God. And Jesus has made us able to have that relationship with God. When Jesus was on earth, he was the place where God dwelt on earth. He was the one that made it possible for us to know God. And he didn't flash that glory very many times, but can you think of a time when he did flash that glory? You heard of the Transfiguration? He takes James and John and Peter up on a mountain, and all of a sudden there is Elijah and Moses, and they're glowing, and Jesus starts glowing, and they freak out. They're like, and it's like they don't know what to say. I don't know if you've ever been in this situation. It happens to me. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to say. and they're like, Peter's the one that spoke up. James and John were just like, and Peter goes, do we need to build them a little tent or something? Do we need to make a hut for them? Because are they going to stay for dinner? I don't know. And they're just, being so crazy because they don't understand what's happening. And they're overwhelmed by the glory of God that they're seeing, that they are reflecting, that's reflecting off of them. It was overwhelming for them. And they saw, the Israelites saw the glory of God when Moses would go up on the mountain and meet with God, and he'd come down with this glowing face. And people were like, turn it off, you put on a veil or something. And he had to wear this veil in front of his face so that he wouldn't freak the people out. And then it would go away, and he could take the veil off, and then he'd go talk to God again, and he'd come down glowing. And I love this verse that is in, I can't remember where it is, but I love this verse that talks about that we with unveiled faces will behold the glory of God in heaven. We won't need veils in heaven. So, so I'm going to stop there because that's where I stopped first hour, and we'll pick up there tomorrow. You may chat now.